My daughter was born at 25 weeks and she weighed 1 pound, 13 ounces.
We spent 8 months in the NICU and another 2 months in the hospital.
There might not be a more helpless feeling than when your baby goes in the NICU and you can't help anybody.
We all kind of feel a lot of pressure that we have to be strong for our families.
I wanted to be the problem solver, the protector, but I couldn't.
Sometimes our true strength is in our vulnerability and being able to ask for help.
It was important to know that I would survive having strong feelings, whatever they might be.
Having the support like Handlehold for a Dad is great, whether it's listening to podcasts, searching the website, going to support groups.
Find somebody to talk to who's experiencing those same things. They know the heartache and they know also the hope and the light at the end of the tunnel. You do not need to go through this journey alone.
Welcome. I am Kelly, founder and CEO of Handlehold, and this is the NICU Community Conference, and we are delighted that you're here, and we're so excited to be shining the light on dads during this panel, because dads also experience post-traumatic stress and anxiety disorders after a traumatic birth and during a NICU stay, and we want them to have the support they so need and deserve. And we have an exciting panel lined up for you. They've already been telling some dad jokes in the green room, so I'm excited to share them with you. We invite everyone to participate in the chat, post your questions in the Q&A, and don't forget to fill out the survey. We are doing some giveaways for those that participate in the surveys. And don't forget, dads, if you have a baby at home and that needs diapers, go to the virtual booth for Huggies and register to win that year's worth of diapers. I know dads love changing diapers. So this session does cover some sensitive topics, and if you need to take a break and step away, that is certainly fine. We do have counselors available in our lounge section on the platform, so if you're in need of support, feel free to join them there. Or come back and watch this later. We are recording our sessions and we'll make them available for you to watch later when you're ready. So with me today, I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Daniel Singley. Dr. Singley is a psychologist and director of the Center for Men's Excellence. His research and practice focus on men's mental health with a particular emphasis on reproductive psychology and the transition to fatherhood. Dr. Singley conducts trainings and presentations around the country to assist individuals and organizations to enhance their level of father inclusiveness, and founded the grant-funded Basic Training for New Dads, Inc., nonprofit, and Padre Cadre social networking application just for dads in order to give new fathers the topics they need to be highly engaged with their infants as well as their partners. Dr. Singley, thank you so much for being here. We are absolutely delighted to be shining the light on dad's mental health. And with that, I'm going to step back and let the dads take it from here.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly, so much. Thanks to you and Crystal, and to Handlehold in general. So yeah, I'm Dan Singley. I'm gonna try to keep my part up front here pretty quick so we can get to the actual paneling and bring out Alex and Andrew. One just sort of general observation I want to make is so my focus is perinatal mental health, reproductive psychology, and I focus on fathers. And within the field of perinatal mental health, looking at and addressing the NICU experience is one of those topics, along with, say, like infertility, that doesn't tend to get as much airplay. And so having an organization like Handlehold and a conference like this and an opportunity to connect with other people, professionals and parents that really get the uniqueness, the anxieties, the joys that can come out of a NICU stay. I'm really thrilled that y'all are doing what you're doing, but also we're very proactive about reaching out to include some dads info. And so I'm briefly wanted to go through some information quickly. We're going to talk about fatherhood and some of the typical mental health issues for NICU dads, look at some of those stressors, and then just a bit about the research. But as I say, like, we're going to kind of blast through that to get to the actual panel, because these dads have some very compelling stories. I have to do some quick plugs. I know that Richard Shaw is here at this conference. I was grateful to be able to contribute to a chapter on fathers in the NICU in their book, Treatment of Psychological Distress, and have recently written a book with my buddy Jane Honigman called Parental Mental Health. It's all about including fathers and having a more sort of gender inclusive approach to reproductive psychology. And with a nonprofit I've worked with for a long time called Postpartum Support International, some of my colleagues and I, who themselves are survivors of all kinds of different aspects of the early childhood experience, fathers that had postpartum depression, anxiety, substance issues, relationship concerns, NICU stays, loss, and so forth, we put together the International Father's Mental Health Day, which occurs the day after Sunday, Father's Day, every year. And it's just a day to raise awareness about some of the mental health and general concerns that can come up for dads around new fatherhood. So you can go to our website or also look up on Facebook. So just top level, I want to plant the seed that in the same way that moms get postpartum, or more broadly perinatal, like you can get during pregnancy, depression and anxiety, it's the same for fathers and for parents of all genders. And 1 in 10 dads will get postpartum depression. Up to about 20% of fathers will develop some kind of, we say PMADS, meaning perinatal mood or anxiety. So that's unipolar depression, bipolar depression, any kind of anxiety disorder, and so on. But that second to last bit about men's socialization and weak emotions tends to be one of the biggest barriers to men being identified as having some of these difficulties, and even if they recognize it themselves, reaching out. And so we're going to talk more about that. That last bullet point, this is a pretty important, beyond the fact that 10% of dads get postpartum depression, not even related to a NICU stay like that, as you're going to see, like that's an even higher percentage in terms of prevalence. But when his partner, most of this is fairly heteronormative, right? But like most of this research has been on male-female new parent couples. When the mom has postpartum depression, 50% of the time, 50% of the time, then the dad develops it too. And so that makes maternal postpartum depression the #1 predictor of paternal postpartum depression. So and this is basically a testament to the importance of the relationship to each parent's mental health, because it can go both ways. I want to quickly mention the phenomenon. This isn't in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that all us shrinks use for diagnostic purposes. But the phenomenon has been studied for over 20 years now. It's called masked male depression, or major depressive disorder male type. And I bring this up so that y'all can have an awareness that, as opposed to sort of the typical way that we think about depression, which is, suicidal, can't get out of bed, very weepy, refusing to be around other people, a lot of people, and in particular men, will manifest a kind of depression that looks different. And at the bottom is the cliff notes, and I'm missing somaticizing. But basically, the guy looks angry, frustrated, highly irritable, frustrated on up into rage, maybe drinking more, using more substances, or really just engaging more in dopaminergic, like you get a cerebral joy juice squirt from doing it, more video games. It could be abusing prescription drugs and so forth, risky sex. And somaticizing means taking psychological distress and expressing it physically. So like, I'm a guy, I can't be depressed, but I can have muscle tension. I can have stomach issues, and backaches, these sorts of things. And withdrawal is more about social withdrawal. And that doesn't mean you're not around people. It means the father is not engaging. So you can be around people, say at work or at home with family, but not really connecting. That's one of those key aspects of this specific kind of very male-centric depression. I only bring this screen up because we usually talk about depression, but the most of the research in the area, and certainly those of us that are doing this work and on a daily basis, anxiety disorders are even more prevalent than depression. And I don't just mean like, oh, I'm kind of stressed, I've lost some sleep. Like, I mean disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress, obsessive compulsive disorder, specific phobias that can come up. So it's critically important to be aware of the prevalence of these anxiety disorders. Like, it's easy to say, like, oh, all parents are kind of stressed. Yeah, that's different than truly meeting diagnostic criteria for one of these. Now, my colleague and friend, Craig Garfield, just released this study, which looked at it measured using the Edinburgh postnatal depression scale. It measured mothers and fathers' depression levels as measured by APDS on admission into the NICU, and then followed them at discharge and after. And the short version of what they found is that more of the mothers had, like a higher percentage of the mothers had depression than the fathers did at admission to the NICU. However, after 30 days post-discharge, the mother's scores had dropped significantly more so than the fathers. The fathers' levels of depression tended to stay the same, and that the moms were more likely to screen positive on that scale. But the dads had the same odds of looking like, they basically looked the same. Like, the dads didn't tend to get that much better. And we can read between the lines. These authors make the argument that oftentimes there are more resources available that are tailored to mothers in the NICU experience than to fathers. So I bring up this research so that y'all have an awareness of moms and dads may experience this kind of depression and the stress of the NICU experience differently. And I strongly encourage folks like nurses, administrators, social workers that are in the NICU, parents yourselves. Like, no, rarely does a parent say, I would like to be screened for depression. It's usually somebody saying, hey, fill this out. But you can. And in a medical system, self-advocating tends to be pretty important. And so this is the part where I get up on a soapbox and say, if you're a parent or you're someone who works with parents and the infants in the NICU, screen these parents. And I'm happy to hand out, I'll send along the PowerPoint. Y'all don't need to take notes so that y'all can download and have this. But I've included some of the industry standard assessments that are pretty quick and easy to use as a way to identify some of these parents that may be really struggling, and then have a sense of, let's direct them to some resources. This is just a quick slide on what I see as the essential pillars of self-care: sleep, diet, exercise, and social support. A lot of parents, when caring for and being a parent of a baby in the NICU is oftentimes all-consuming, and the experience that can then leave them feeling like, I can't take my eye off the ball. And self-care and leaning in on their marriage and their relationship can be a couple aspects of their lives that just completely go aside due to guilt, due to anxiety. And the brutal fact is that parents need that. Parents who with babies of special needs or babies that are in the NICU need even more than your average parent to be working, to be vigilant about getting in some aspect of the self-care. So I include this, and I'm sure we'll come back to this when we get to the panel. And this slide just has a little bit of information about programs. There are some programs for parents that are in the NICU that have been researched, that have an evidence base behind them. I want to draw your attention to the fact that that second bullet point, fathers really do want to be involved, and oftentimes feeling invisible or not being involved itself is a big source of stress. And in a 2015 article that looked at what are some of these resources, look at that top bullet. These dads want, many times they want an opportunity to be able to talk with somebody else who's been through the NICU experience, because it is so unusual and it's so difficult and holds the potential to be traumatizing. And I'm using that in a clinical sense, not just upsetting. So I wanted to show you all these. There are programs out there. If you're an administrator, if you are a parent and realize, hey, they're in a NICU, you got your hands full when you're doing what you are, but particularly if like when your kid graduates and if you have the interest in doing so, you can go back to them and say, hey, how about having some actual programming for the parents? I bring these resources. These are just broadly for new fatherhood. In particular, if you're familiar with Reddit, the social media platform, the father-centric chunk of Reddit is called Daddit. And there are subreddits for virtually everything, definitely including neonatal into the intensive care. And it's one of the most active virtual communities I've ever seen. And you can just put it on your phone, even if you're there and you're in the hospital day after day after day after day. It's not like sitting with an in-person support group, but plenty of dads can get a real sense of comfort from that. These are a bunch of references you probably don't want. And now, so I want to turn over to what I think is really the meat of what we're doing here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I actually don't know. Oh, nice. Kelly and Crystal behind the green curtain made it happen. Alex, Andrew, welcome you guys.
Hey, nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I'm super thrilled that dads like yourselves that have lived experience with babies and yourselves then being in the NICU are willing to come talk. Why don't you just say a little bit about yourselves, who you are, where you are, and what your NICU experience has been, and then we can kind of go from there.
Perfect.
Alex, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Alex Zavala. Let's see. With my youngest, she was born at 27 weeks, and that was about 8 years ago. With her, she was a preemie and weighed 2 pounds 5 ounces, and we did 67 days in the NICU with her. Totally unexpected. You're talking about a Monday morning phone call at 9 a.m. that my wife's water broke, and by noon, after all kinds of stuff, emergency C-section and everything, baby was born by noon. And within an hour was transferred to a different hospital about 45 minutes away. And so did the stay, have been a NICU parent ever since, and everything that comes with that. And now changed our lives and changed my life. And with everything that's happened, it put me in a spot where now I am a NICU dad advocate and work with different NICU dads, mentor different NICU dads, speak about NICU dads, and just try to get as much research and information out there in front of everybody. Because when I was in the NICU, there wasn't anything out there. And, it's definitely something that we're looking to change. And that's why I'm chomping at the bit for stuff like this, because all the information you were showing is absolutely right. But we'll get onto that. Go ahead, Andrew.
So Alex, it's funny because some of your situation sounds exactly like what I had, and also so completely different, which just shows the range. My wife went into labor with twins at 27 weeks, and she was able to stop and go on bed rest for 4 weeks. So there's a whole different world where I had the same exact experience as you, right? So I already have at that time a son who was just under 2 years old, and the twins were an unexpected thing to begin with. Don't even get me started on that conversation. They don't run in our family. Somebody's going to ask me that. They don't run in our family. They run. Trust me. They run. They don't run in the family. At 31 weeks, they were just like, let's get out of this joint. And that was the scariest, craziest day, because when you're dealing with, at that point, we knew we were going to be in the NICU. Like, we already did the tour, the whole thing. I'm based in Pennsylvania. There's an amazing NICU nearby. So we had as much comfort as we could. Alex, we didn't have your situation where what like, what the hell's going on? Where am I going? Like, we kind of knew, which is better and worse because we also had to like let that soak in for a bit. They were born at about 3.5 pounds each. And certainly not ready for the world yet. So they went right into the NICU. And I remember leaving my wife behind in the surgical room, where at one point there were 15 plus people in there. And as my wife said, everybody's seeing everything. Everything's on display right now. And I went to the NICU, and I remember holding my daughter's fingers for the first time. And this photos, it's like a flashback, because, you know, the finger fits on the tip of your finger, and I'm doing it twice, right? So I'm 2 different just plastic boxes like that. And it's just, it feels like that was yesterday. And the girls are now in 1st grade. They're doing great, but that feels like that was yesterday. The beeps, the wires, the whole thing. So since then, I've made a point too, same thing as you, Alex, to get out there and talk about being a dad, the mental health side of dads, because again, that wasn't happening a lot at that point. And I've written some books about it, but I even wrote a NICU guide because I was just looking for information that also talked about like what dads can do, because I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help, but I didn't know what the heck to do. So it's great to get a chance to talk about these things.
Andrew, when you were talking about the twins and like that got me going in my chest, like,
right. It's like I feel it. I can feel their finger on me right now doing that.
Well, yeah, and as you say, like there's some real similarities, but also the singleton versus twin experience have very different present. Alex, as you were talking, I was curious to know, did you get any information beforehand, even just like in a birthing class or anything, about NICU? Like, had anybody said like, hey, this is a potential part of the continuum of care or the experience? Or
No, and that's one of the things that we talk about. So for us, we were high risk. Our oldest was born at 30 weeks. And so we were already seeing specialists and everything. You know, we always joke about having more pictures of our daughter before she was born than people do after their kids are born. All the ultrasounds and everything. It's crazy. But, you know, even doing that, it was still unexpected. And even to this day, they can't tell us what happened. But there wasn't a NICU tour or anything, you know, because so for us, at 27 weeks, we went in and had a test. It's a FFN test. Anyway, they test the protein, and they tell you have a 2-week window of no baby, or you're going to have a baby within 2 weeks. Our test came back negative, and they're like, hey, go travel, because you're not going to be able to after this. Well, that was on a Thursday. She was born on Monday, and so it was still just like everybody else. It literally is a phone call, and your world is just shook, and it's never going to be the same. But there's also that part of trying to shift everything. And then, like I said, my daughter was sent to a different hospital that I had never stepped foot in. And I didn't know anything. By the time I took care of everybody, our oldest was 9 years old at the time, and I had to take care of everything. But by the time I got to the hospital, it was already, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening of that day, which the event started at 9 a.m. And I'm walking into a building I've never been before in my life. There's nobody there, because it's evening, it's a different time. Trying to, figure out my way and maneuver into still going over the craziest day of my life, and carrying all that. And it's just insane. So there isn't that, and there usually isn't, unless you're one of the special cases, I think that you're going to go into the NICU. For most of us, we don't know anything about them. I didn't even know what a NICU was. There wasn't a conversation or anything that we had.
I kind of think they were, this is a broad term, right? Providers and the information you get almost avoid that, because it's almost like you don't want to talk about what could be perceived as bad news, right? Like, here's the NICU, here's how it works, here's what you might experience, because that almost signifies, hey, you might have this child early. So nobody really wanted to talk about it. Like, we knew it was there. They pointed to where it was. But even like as the expectant parents, you almost didn't want to talk about it because then that meant that it might happen. Like you're like somehow going to manifest, right? I remember my wife didn't really want to talk about it. Even though with twins, the likelihood you're going to be in the NICU is way up. So it's, I don't know, provider wise, that's a tough thing to balance because you don't want to like scare people. But on the other hand, that's useful information, right?
Yeah.
For that.
I think you can handle it.
Yeah. Yes. And one of, I think it's so cool to have a couple of like fellow dadvocates to be talking with in this. Like one of the most common dynamics that I see at play with new parents who have like a broad range of experiences is there's this like Hollywood Hallmark version of what it's supposed to look like. Pregnancy, birth goes smoothly, you go right home from the hospital, healthy baby, and when things come up, like, you know, a baby has a difficult congenital defect or is born super underweight or baby's born healthy, one or both of the parents are really struggling, postpartum psychosis, depression, like, and so forth. There tends to be, like you guys are saying, such a resistance to drawing attention to what plans B, C, or D might look like. And I find it to be, I understand it, I get it. Like the whole, like, this is going to manifest like it's bad juju or something, but it's not. In fact, I talk with a lot of it. I teach classes for expectant dads here in San Diego. And one of the things I talk to them about is, hey man, be part of the birth planning process. And that's just plan A. Like I tell them, make 3 copies of it. 1 copy is in the go bag. The second copy is for your birth professional, and third copy, just burn that because you don't know what's going to happen. Like literally, and then be the one to try to have the conversation to talk about it, because you don't want to be talking about that for the, like Alex, you're saying, like, I didn't know what a NICU was. It's understandable, but I for me as a practitioner and somebody who works with, you know, developing programs with hospitals and NICUs in different ways, I work so hard for folks like to be able to try to build this in, to talk about different issues they have, including the mental health stuff.
Yeah. Well, not to mention when I got the information that morning, it was after the birth, and you know they were telling us about the NICU finally, and social worker hands us a folder and is like describing where I should go. That day, you're already getting so much information. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant. Like
overload.
It's just too much. And to finally get it there was no way. When I got to the NICU, I'm like, what did they say?
I totally get that. I remember when I've been working on different books that I made a point. It's my little piece of like playing my stake in the ground. That I wanted to put parts in there about the NICU, even though it's really supposed to be about like becoming a new dad overall, right? But I wanted to make sure that I could put stuff in there that also said it's okay if it ends up going down that path too. It doesn't mean anybody's done anything wrong, which honestly, hearing that I think matters a lot too, because you feel somehow like you've screwed up. My wife on some level felt like she did something wrong, which that's not how it works, right? But having just a little piece in there that you might go down this path, here's a little bit of information, but just having in the back of your head that could happen and that's okay, and then that's just a different path you're going on, and you're going to go through this. But that doesn't mean it's like everything's falling apart. You're just going to have to jump into a whole new world.
So I'm curious to know, so I in my little, PowerPoint spiel on the way in, I made quick mention about anxiety, depression, sort of, the mental health aspect for dads. And I wanted to ask the two of you, did you and or your partners experience any of that? Andrew, you're right.
You had a pretty sweet checklist there. I'm like, yep, that one in there. Yep, that sounds good. I had. It's important to know for me that we had the NICU experience. We were there about 30-something days. So, and Alex, you were there for 60, which that blows my mind. That must have felt like 5 years. But the day we took, a day or two after we took our second daughter home, the first one made it a couple days early. The second daughter came home. She actually had basically like a relapse where she got gray and lethargic. And long, crazy story short, we had to rush her to the hospital, and she stopped breathing completely. They had to perform CPR on her. Remember, she's 3.5 pounds, so the CPR looks crazy. Like her lips turned black. It was like to that level. Obviously, she's fine today, but we had to life flight her to a different hospital. So Alex said that felt like that same situation, 45 minutes away, actually. And I'm in a whole different area in a different ICU. And we thought we were done with everything, and we weren't. Like, we're right back with the monitors and all that. So I'm saying all that because I thought maybe I can kind of push through this. We still had, at that point, a 2-year-old, them running back and forth to try to take care of. It took probably a year before I felt like I resurfaced and became like a person again, and not just a guy who was trying to take care of his family. Like, my wife is trying to like literally take care of the kids, like breastfeed and all that. I'm just trying to make sure the family can function and do all those things. And eventually, I absolutely developed a level of depression that I didn't understand. And if I saw the slides, that would have been helpful, because now I'm like, yeah, I was getting angry a lot at nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm not an angry guy, but that doesn't matter because that's how this stuff works, right? I would just get mad and yell and all this stuff at nothing. Eventually went to see a therapist who started to ask good questions like, have you ever thought about the fact you never actually let yourself process what happened to you and your family in the NICU? And I was like, I never really did, because you're just in like fight or flight mode for so long.
You're like, I've been busy.
It's like I've been just trying to survive, but I never really thought about like, wow, that was super upsetting and emotionally draining. Maybe I should like deal with that. So that's a big thing I talk about now, that I hope any NICU provider can tap into. If you see dads around, like, give them a chance to talk about how they're feeling, what they're experiencing. Yeah, getting to talk to other dads. I was just kind of on my own, you know.
Yeah, well, seeing that checklist now, I was going to say I didn't go the depression route, but maybe I did. For me, it was more on the anxiety. I mean, you know, we talk about it's literally a phone call, and then boom, that switch goes off, and you know, it goes on for your flight or flight, and it doesn't go off. And so I'm 8 years out of the NICU, and I think obviously I'm still dealing with things. You know, and I see an escalation every year where, you know, you take on more just in life in general. But I think a huge chunk of that, you know, now dealing with anxiety and where it's at right now comes from the NICU. And, you know, one of the things that I have, and it's a little selfish in there too, but it works, is, you know, I host NICU dad groups in some of the NICUs out here. You know, I talk to a bunch of NICU dads and mentoring them. So I'm sharing my story, and I'm having conversations with, I know that's therapeutic for me, you know, and I know that helps me. And so that's why anybody wants, I'm like, yeah, hey, let's do it. I need it, you know? And so it's really on that, but it's yeah, you know, and the self-care and stuff that we talk about, I wasn't doing any of that, you know, and I always talk about a NICU dad bod that we all get, you know, you're eating fast food, you're eating hospital food, you're not exercising, you know, for most of us.
Yeah.
A lot of guys get the beard going. I don't know why.
Yeah, I can't. Mine's never gonna hit your length. You're like the epic dad beard going on.
Yeah, but we all put on weight. I mean, I think I gained almost from pregnancy through the NICU and everything. I had lost a bunch of weight, man. I gained it all back. I mean, we were talking like 80 pounds or something after when it's all said and done. And then I was the stay-at-home guy, and I was at home with the baby for therapies and all those doctor's visits. And so I never got that chance to set that time aside, you know, and I should have. You know, we talk about it now, and you know, one of the biggest things I think is, you know, if you have a fitness center in a hospital, you know, allowing NICU parents access to that, because it'd be huge, especially for dads. You know, you have to have some kind of outlet, and we didn't have that.
Yeah, well, and for the parents, and in this case, you're talking about the dads, you got to give yourself permission to do it. Yep. And oftentimes my experience is that it's those internal barriers and the shoulds and the have tos and the what ifs. And this whole thing got kicked off by out of the blue call on a Monday morning. you don't want to miss that next call. And that, so
Absolutely.
one of the points I wanted to make is I was watching that video that kicked off this segment, which is lovely and so on point. And one of the statements that jumped out like just off the screen to me was about the experience of these dads' vulnerability. And so like, you guys don't strike me as a couple of like, hardcore bro dude, knuckle dragging, ball scratching guy, right? Like,
Yeah.
a little bit more open. I can't tell you, I've worked with so I'm in California, right? There's the whole crop of like, granola dads over here that are, open and earthy and so forth. And there's plenty of military dads too. Sometimes you get both. But that idea of vulnerability, when you do men's work, which I see almost exclusively men and couples, you come to have a profound understanding of the role of the experience of vulnerability and shame. That's at the heart of men's mental health. And some of the really sort of confusing and kind of stupid looking things that we do that somebody else that's on the outside looking in would be like, dude, what are you doing? And if you're able to sort of peel back some of this, you can oftentimes get to an awareness of vulnerability, of a threat I'm telling myself is out there, and or the risk of shame. And the transition to fatherhood, like central casting, is what does it mean to you to be a father? Protect, provide. As soon as you get a baby in the NICU, unless you are a NICU nurse and you happen to have a baby that's there, which would be an ethical issue, your ability to protect and provide for that baby's basic needs in the way that we typically think about it is off the table. And so the initial identity shift to fatherhood, that at least that piece of it, the protect, there's also empathy and love and nurture and skin to skin and all this piece of it, but that sort of bedrock protect, provide, a lot of fathers, new fathers, especially fathers in the NICU, don't get that, and or they do, but it's very delayed. And so I'm telling you, this is part of why I'm bringing this back to the two of you. I have worked with many dads at this point who they had a perfectly healthy baby with an uncomplicated vaginal birth, and the dad ended up developing acute stress that then became post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's mystifying to folks like, what are you doing? Like, everything went great, but all the conditions for the development of PTSD, it was terrifying, it was out of their control, they couldn't leave the situation, there's a whole lot riding on it, and they're telling myself, I need to be running this thing, controlling it. They were all present at an uncomplicated normal birth, let alone I got to go trail my kid to a NICU and leave my wife in a room with 15 people. That in and of itself, it just ramps it up. And so that's why I bring it back to the two of you, like, if you can connect with any of that.
Well, I want to say this first. Andrew, did you think you were going to cry at all on this thing? I didn't think I was. But...
Anytime I talk about NICU stuff, I assume I'm going to cry at some point.
Yeah. So that was what I was going to start off with, is you look at me and, I've got the tattoos and everything. I cannot talk about this stuff without crying. And I was never a crier before. It was after going through this and seeing my daughter and everything. Can't talk about our story without crying. And I'm talking ugly cry too. But for what you're talking about, I think we had all that stuff, but there's something else that comes into play that normal dads don't have. And when you talk to dads, NICU dads, it's the feeling of a failure.
Yeah.
And so you add all these things in that you just described, but then throw that, and I'm talking like that's probably more than 50% of the weight you're going to carry is feeling of a failure because you have zero control. Yep. And so, you talk about the normal dads and what they go through. Yeah. But then you throw that in and I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, because there's nothing you can do. And there literally is nothing you can do.
I know exactly what you mean. I remember watching Quinn the one who was became ill again. She had pneumonia. That's what's basically what happened. I remember watching her being whisked off into the middle of the night in a medevac helicopter. And I'm watching, like, my little baby, who I've barely been able to hold at this point, right, is gone and just in the flight. And I just remember thinking, I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do to help. I mean, I can get us to the next hospital and then wait again and hope things work out, but there's nothing I can do. Where so many other situations, you feel like there's something you can contribute. And that's on top of the normal dad issues, I think, when you're a new parent, because I talk about this kind of stuff a lot. Men in general aren't raised to have these, not just instincts, but I'm talking like the mental preparation. When I was a kid, nobody handed me a baby and said, hey, do you hold this baby for a second? Nobody hands it to the boys. They hand it to the girls. And I'm not going to get into like the gender biases and all that, but that's what naturally happens. I didn't hold a baby until it was my son, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of dads, right? So there's a freaking out that's happening because you no idea. You're just like, I'm going to drop this thing, I'm going to break it, and then what are you going to do? And then you add the NICU on top of it, and now there's all these new terms I'm supposed to learn. And you know, if the numbers go up or down, and maybe they can go in, and maybe they can't go home yet. And also, you feel like you're becoming like an expert, like I'm on Grey's Anatomy, and I feel like I both am super in, but also have no idea what's happening, right? And because I'm not the mom, I can't even like nurse or do something like that. I can do some kangaroo care, but it is a feeling of helplessness that I have not felt since in the same way, and I don't even know how I can recreate it. It's that very specific time, you know.
Andrew, Alex, you spoke to having kind of an internal dialogue about being a failure, with, you know, like the opposite of I'm protecting, I'm providing, I'm showing up, I'm the fix-it guy. Andrew, did you have some of that as well?
Yeah. I don't think it was an active voice where I had like that exact statement. It was the same sentiment though.
Yeah.
It was that sentiment of I'm not doing something that I should be doing. And you know what? It's what makes it worse, and no, it's never intentional. But Alex, I bet you had the same situation. Is when you have other dads or even moms who try to like empathize with you, but their kids were never in the NICU, and they'll say stuff like, "Oh yeah, we had a rough time early on. Somebody was colicky or something like that. Yeah, we get this is yeah." So they're in a hospital for a bit, as if like they have like a cold and they're not, because they don't know, because you don't know until you're in that crazy environment. So then you feel like you're actually helping other people feel better about their own situation rather than you feeling better about yours. And that's if anybody asks you, the dad, at all how you're feeling, because pretty much they're only asking the mom.
Oh yeah, don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, they
No, let's get started on that.
Doctors and nurses.
Throughout it, like dads oftentimes feel very invisible, or
right.
like they're. So let's definitely talk about your experience along those lines.
Right. Even with great doctors and nurses, and we had great ones. We really did. I mean, Wellspan New York Hospital was renowned for its NICU. And even then, I think there were most times when they told my wife updates or looked for her or basically just talked to her, like I wasn't also sitting there for the past, 8 hours right beside it. Because I'm going to guess they've had a lot of experiences where there are dads who just like, it's just flying over the head and they don't care. But there's so many other dads who want to know. I like that bullet point you had, like their dads want to be more involved. And the best way to be involved is if you see a dad, like latch onto him and make sure he's like being asked questions. If he's noticed anything, that was never asked of me, but they'd ask my wife, okay, so how are they doing? How are your babies doing? But they want to ask me the same thing. So that's like a little small thing, but it definitely happened.
Well,
I don't think it is a small thing. keep going, Alex.
It's huge. Thanks for the setup, because this is like my number one thing to talk about. From dads that I'm talking to, and even from myself, we see that this systematically starts in the beginning. I mean, we're talking about those early, OBGYN visits where you're going in and they basically treated me like I was a driver. They were just
you're the chauffeur who got them there, right?
Yes. And, last 10 seconds of the visit, do they turn and ask me any questions? And that was it. And, I've talked to dads where, they were in those visits and asking mom her whole medical history. And so while they're talking to mom about that, the dad's like, hey, in his head, he's going through his medical history, like, oh, who had this, who had that, waiting for them to ask him. They never asked. And he's like, what? So you have that starting on then, and it just systematically goes in and gets transferred. I mean, you're in the NICU sometimes. Ours was great. Dell Children's awesome, and they made me go in there. Man, my daughter was so small, and I just didn't want to touch her or do anything. I thought I was going to break her.
Exactly. You think you're going to break it, but by touching them, right?
Yeah, and then you see them change the diaper, and you're like, oh my God, okay.
The diapers that are this big.
Yeah,
right?
and I'm like, okay, this kid can handle a lot. But, and our nurses would have me go in there, but that's not the case in a lot of situations. Dad here, like I said from the beginning, doesn't get talked to, and then they go in the NICU, and then they wonder why he's just standing on the side and not coming in. Well, he's been trained to do that, and sometimes we also have guilt. I know for us, everything that was going on, my wife's never had the opportunity to hold her baby after, she's given birth. 2 preemies, 2 NICU stays. So knowing that, seeing that, I was not going to take any first away from her or anything, even kangaroo care. I'm like, hey, that's you, bond with this baby. My time will come. I know it will. So I avoided things like that as much as I could because of the guilt already of spending so much time with our daughter when she was born while my wife healed at a different hospital. And so, those things go into play too. And you do all that. But, I always tell folks, back in the day, dads weren't even in the delivery room.
Yeah.
They were out in the lobby smoking cigars.
It's like Mad Men. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you have dads going in there and, they're involved. And I think just systematically, we need to see the change. You have more and more dads stay at home, taking care of the kids. We're also the ones that are responsible for everything. We're the ones that are supposed to be checking on once we leave the NICU, it's us. And so we're the ones that are supposed to be responsible to check and make sure our wife's not having postpartum and the baby's okay and everything. So we're the holder of all this information. You should be talking to us since the beginning. Like, we're the quarterback of this thing. And, we get treated like we're the water boys sometimes,
Nor should anybody expect that your partner is going to be the one who either fills you in or like make sure you're doing okay, because they have a tremendous amount put on their shoulders. The amount of pressure put on moms is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So you can't assume that they're going to even have the mental capacity to like check on you, because they're just trying to like, first of all, physically recover, but the amount of stress they have. So that's something I think that's helpful. And think of it this way: if Alex and I feel pretty involved dads, it seems like, and if we had this experience, imagine what about the dads who maybe aren't even knowing that they're going to be involved, not sure what they want to do about fatherhood, maybe at a NICU that's brand new or maybe isn't as well accomplished. Think about that. Like, this is like almost best case scenario, and it's still not in an ideal place.
So okay, this is actually a nice setup. I want to make an observation and then ask you all what may be a sensitive question. And the observation is this: part of what I work really hard to do is to have a more gender inclusive approach to the early parenthood experience. And so I'm a psychologist, and so oftentimes we'll use the umbrella term maternal mental health. And that's just sort of part and parcel of the invisibility of the partner, the non-gestational partners, the dads, and in many cases the dads. And you're a system. And I don't expect everybody else to be psychologists. Like, that's my jam. But when I'm working with a family, or I'm working with like a hospital system or a clinic, and they want some consultation around involvement, really the first thing I tell them is, you got to think of the family as a system, and then you have to acknowledge each of the pieces in it, including the baby or babies and the parents, and then start asking yourself the questions of, how can we assess them? How can we come to know them? How can we engage all points of the system. And in the area of perinatal mental health, one of the most robust, one of the most common findings is that no matter what your gender is, as a new parent, your mental health is highly linked to the status of the relationship. And so Alex and Andrew, you all elected to be on this panel, and so your partners didn't. And so that's what I'm saying, like sensitivity, like you don't have to get into stuff that you don't want to, but I did want to know if you would mind just quickly speaking to how did you experience the impact on your relationships? This is what happens. They put you in a room with a shrink.
That's a good question, because it's like a tangled question for me, as in none of it, there were like straightforward answers, solutions, understandings to anything for the longest time, because you couldn't even figure out what was a NICU reaction. What is the stress of we've got 2 new kids in our family? What is just the sheer exhaustion of it all? And what is an actual interpersonal relationship between my partner and I? Right? Mm-hmm. That's a lot to untangle when also, again, we were like sleeping 2 hours a night or whatever it was. I don't even remember. It was just a blackout period in a sense. So that's a lot to figure out. We have said that we are a stronger couple because we went through that experience, but having that experience turns you to a different type of couple too. So you're stronger, but also different, because it's like you went through like a traumatic experience together, you know?
Well, let me ask you, Adrian, you resonated to that, that mass male depressive checklist, and in particular, the more sort of irritability. Did any of that, like frustration or irritability, did you find that playing out with your partner? Like back and forth?
Yeah, it wasn't so much like a snapping back and forth kind of thing. And I've heard dads that's been their experience too, because of the stress level at all. It was that I couldn't even, I remember feeling like I couldn't even control how I was reacting to things. So she can bring up something benign related to whatever, and I would just feel this anger that was within me because of the things you talked about, like because you're trying to almost like harness something in that hasn't been addressed. So that can have a pretty big impact on a relationship until it does get addressed, even though at that exact moment you need your relationship to be stronger than ever too. Like you need your person. It's like a tip of the cap to like the single moms I saw in there. Again, I don't know how people can go through it, right? That's a whole another segment. But you need everybody else, your support system, your partner more than ever, but also you feel like you're not yourself enough to be that person for them, and vice versa, right? So we did a lot of something that helped us was acknowledging when we felt like we were getting kind of out of control, as in like we felt like we weren't ourselves, and just saying, hey, I'm getting super frustrated, and I know that's not anything you've done. I'm stepping away from whatever I have to do, like just stepping away, different room, different whatever, and that helped a lot. That helps actually just long term. That's a good long term approach, but especially in that kind of situation, because then I didn't have to feel like I had to be perfect all the time, right? Because she wasn't asking me to be at all, but I didn't feel like I could always be the kind of person that I feel like I was kind of failing as a husband, failing as a dad, failing as an employee. We haven't even touched on that because I was also a full-time employee, running back and forth between work, lunch break, NICU, go back to work, go pick up my kid, So you're feeling like you're failing all over the place. That's going to make you feel pretty angry and upset.
I feel for us, it was just longer amounts of time. I mean, do 2 zombies really have much interaction, when they're going around somewhere? And so we got so into the motions too that it just kept going that way. It was like we didn't feel anything, because we were just going, and you'd have bits of anger or crying or whatever here and there, but for us it was just such a long Groundhog Day of the same thing, wake up, work, NICU, go to sleep, repeat, and everything else that came in there. But it seemed like things happened way later on, then we would have some things that we need to get dealt with, and
Mm-hmm.
talking like a year later. And I mean, even then, we barely through COVID had a conversation that we never had it's been over 7 years. And, it was just one of those nights during COVID of being quarantined on the couch, and
Yeah.
we're like, wow, and breakthrough. And, it's just different things like that. But, we saw it coming that way for us.
Hey,
Huh?
it's funny. Like I was just about to say, like, I was looking at time, like, wow, I would really like another hour with these guys.
We need at least another hour or 2 or 10.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to give a shout out to some of the. I actually popped open the chat and saw some really helpful points about how Hanta Hold's mobile app has fatherhood focused support specialists, and you've got fatherhood mentors. I just like all these really, really helpful, phenomenal points about what you have to offer. So
Yeah. Well,
thanks for that.
we really see it as a high level need and something that we've wanted to focus on. Alex and I have been talking about this for a couple of years. And we finally got the funding to hire our first dad focused family support specialist. He just came on board last week. We have the Dad podcast that we do in collaboration with Alex, the NICU Dad. So Hand to Hold Dad podcast. We're looking at starting support groups for dads virtually. We already have them in some of the hospitals where Alex is leading. But there just needs to be so much more. So many things that you talked about today. Thank you all. Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing those stories and those tears. And I was picking on Alex a little bit in the chat that, don't let that beard and tattoos throw you. Teddy bear.
Kelly has seen me cry a lot.
But I just think it just really helps us understand that dads need support. I love seeing that first statistic of that dads want to talk to a peer mentor, someone who's been through a similar experience. And that's kind of why we thought the podcast might work. Maybe they don't want to go sit in a room and talk about their feelings, but maybe they would sit in their truck and listen to a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dads talking about the experience. But we just know that there needs to be more. We want the fathers to have the same level of support that the mothers have, and find it in the way that is most comfortable for them. That I again just appreciate all of you so much. I want to make sure there's no questions in the chat. We just had someone definitely bring up the fact that COVID and the additional restrictions. So many of our families this year that we supported, they couldn't be in the NICU together. So think about that additional layer of stress that when the dad could come in and hold the baby, but the mom couldn't be there, and vice versa. And then they were trying to share information, and just a really difficult extra layer of challenges. And in some of the hospitals, those restrictions haven't lifted yet. So we're really trying to be advocates and proponents for them to ease up on some of those restrictions, because we think that there's going to be some long-term additional mental health, emotional challenges associated with having a baby in the NICU during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, again, thank you so much. I just want to leave with a few reminders. There are surveys to fill out. You are entered to win prizes for filling out the surveys. We want everyone to download the app and learn more about the app, not just for NICU professionals, but for NICU parents as well, to download the app. And join us again. We got about an hour break, and then we have our last session of our 3-day conference coming up at 4 o'clock. And so I want to invite you all back here to join us for our last session. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. I learned a lot. Thank you again, gentlemen. We appreciate you being there.